Welcome to the next chapter of As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. This is the second to last episode of the podcast for 2022. I'm taking the week between Christmas and New Year's off. Next week is a super rad show as Metalcore Nerds host Sean Mott joins me to chat about the best of 2022. So if you like movies, TV, books, music, comics, etc., don't miss next week's recap. It's going to be a lot of fun. This week, we welcome to the podcast Matt Fisher, frontman for Richmond hardcore band Contact. Contact released Before and Through and Beyond All Time back in September on Patient Zero Records. Matt talks about growing up in and leaving Florida, discovering Rage Against the Machine, how Contact got started, and the themes on the band's EP. This was a delightful chat that didn't feel like someone coming on the pod to promote their band and album, but like talking to a long-lost friend about something we both love. So I hope you guys enjoy getting to know Matt Fisher from Contact. How you doing?
Good, man. It's really good to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you too. I love that people feel free to just like cold hit me up with their album, be like, check us out. We think you'd like this. I appreciate that people feel free to do that.
I'm glad. You know, it always feels a little dorky, but I'm glad I did it anyway. I've used to podcasts and stuff, and I still do, but I used to have like a music and comic book thing. And I always loved it when people were just like, "Hey, you want to talk?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll read your book."
Yeah, definitely. Although it's funny when you pull up a Bandcamp page, because I think I just like scrolled down and just off first glance, it's like Gun Control, Reborn, and then I saw Christian nationalism, and I was like, "Oh, what am I getting into? What is this band?" And then I read the band, and I was like, "Oh, okay, we're cool."
Yeah, not anti-Christian nationalism.
I was like,
the funny thing, it's kind of like it's like Nazis. It's like you never hear one that's just like, "Yeah, I'm a Nazi." It's like you never meet anybody who's like, "Yeah, I'm like a Christian nationalist."
Right. It's always
life would be easier, probably in some ways.
Right. I am a bad person. You'd be like, "Okay, great."
Yeah, you should not hang out with me because here's my thing.
How are things in Richmond for you right now?
Things are good, man. It's it's sunny and cold, which I like. I grew up in Florida with no winter, so I like winter when it's sunny. It's just the like clouds and the snow, which the snow's magical like the first time, and then it's sad, and like seasonal depression is the thing. Yeah,
I get that. What was growing up in Florida like?
Oh man, weird.
Yeah,
I mean, Florida's weird. Like it has whatever its reputation is. That's correct.
That's so funny. The people stay there. People stay.
Yeah, the thing about, there's kind of two avenues there. One of them is just like, yeah, I know it's terrible, but it's home and it's familiar.
Yeah.
Okay, I have some friends that are like that. The other more popular avenue is like on the Florida crest, it should say bad stuff happens everywhere. That's like the Florida motto. Like if you're like, hey, you ever notice that like people get eaten by animals a lot in this state? They're like, bad stuff happens everywhere. I'm like, that's true technically. Or like, you ever notice that this is the only state in the union where like clinical lycanthropy is a thing, where somebody really thinks they're a werewolf enough to like claw another person's face off? It's like, bad things happen everywhere. That's true, but
when we moved from Philadelphia, we were like, should we move to Florida? Florida would be cool. We could move to like Orlando. That'd be fun. And then we were like, no, we can't. No, we can't.
We can't move to Florida. My assessment is that you made a good decision.
Yeah.
People are like, "Oh, what brought you to Richmond College?" I was like, "No, somebody bought me a bus ticket." Like, I had somewhere, like somebody offered me a room, and I left Florida immediately.
Nice. Well, what got you into music?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, I think I always liked music. It's kind of weird because I feel like the answer to that question for a lot of people is my family was musical. Like my dad played saxophone or whatever. My family is not musical at all. I mean, they listen to music occasionally, but it's so not a big part of my family system. Yeah. So the fact that I was into it from early on is kind of weird. I think it's probably like a byproduct of the fact that I'm just like a pretty emotional person. And I have been since I was a little kid. Like I've always sort of struggled with like anxiety, depression and stuff like that, even from a pretty young age. And so music is just one of those things where like, yeah, you can like read a poem or look at a painting and feel like seen, you know, or feel like, yeah, I get it, what that person was going through. But there's something about music that's like really like sort of gets that emotional core going, you know? So, I mean, as far as like punk and stuff like that, you know, I'm 38. So I was very much like a kid that heard Green Day on the radio, you know, Green Day, Nirvana and like the Offspring and stuff like that. And my older brother was like a skater. And I feel like that's another common, somebody's older brother had some tapes or CDs or something. So he was kind of into it. But, you know, I just grew up during that time when there was Nirvana on the radio. So
right. Yeah.
It was a low barrier of entry. But I think it really wasn't until I think I was in maybe late seventh grade that I bought the soundtrack to the terrible Godzilla remake with Matthew Broderick in it. I don't know. How old are you?
38.
Okay, so we're the same age. You remember. Yeah. So the Godzilla. And it had No Shelter by Rage Against the Machine on it, which I could do a whole hour on about how they like intentionally, they said yes to a soundtrack song and then wrote a song about how everything you're hearing is stupid and Godzilla is just a distraction to what's going on in Central America with Coca-Cola or whatever, you know? And so I heard that and I think that's when it clicked.
Yeah.
Where I was like, oh, there's something to this. It's not just, there was something about Green Day. Like I remember hearing Welcome to Paradise. And my older brother was struggling with heroin at the time, was in his first sort of stint of rehab. And I can remember hearing Welcome to Paradise and thinking like, oh, this is like real life. You know, this is this thing I'm experiencing that I'm not supposed to be experiencing, you know, that like is a brokenness or whatever. So a little bit of that, but yeah, man, when I heard No Shelter, I was like, oh, this is like the codex by which I can like interpret reality.
Yeah.
Like this is real, you know? And so, yeah, you kind of like marry that with, I very quickly sort of intuited that other stuff that sounded like that didn't have, you know, like Limp Bizkit is not going to give me like a worldview, you know? Korn is just like some weird trauma processing that I didn't really connect with. And so I kind of took the like Green Day Nirvana thing and the Rage Against the Machine thing and put them together and really started exploring, you know, that realm of music that has something to say. I think I also got 36 Chambers that year. So there's definitely the hip hop thing going on there too.
Yeah. From Rage, did you like, at some point, did you figure out Zach was from like Inside Out and open up this like Revelation hardcore? Like
eventually, but by the time I learned about Inside Out, I was already so into hardcore that it blew my mind. Yeah. It was like, I can remember it was like, so I don't know that I heard Inside Out until maybe 5 or 6 years later, till I was 18 or 19. Like, and then I made the connection and I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah.
But I can remember realizing, which now this seems stupid, but back then, you know, we didn't have, you need to just Google, you couldn't just
right.
Google stuff. I remember finding out that Tim and Matt from Rancid were also Tim and Matt from Operation Ivy, and just being like, oh my God, this is amazing. And yeah, kind of same thing with Zach.
Yeah. Or it's like Chad from Newfound Glory being like, he sang in Shai Hulud. What the fuck?
Yep. Yeah, totally. I remember seeing Newfound Glory open for Trial in Daytona. That was like a famed show in where I grew up. And it was funny because they were still sort of they didn't sound like Rites of Spring, but they were still like more of a real emo band and not doing the pop punk thing yet. And they were so stoked to open for Trial. It's so weird.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How quickly did you get acclimated to like the local scene and dive into what was happening wherever you were in Florida?
That's a good question. Pretty quickly. I definitely excuse me. I rode on the bus with this kid named Dan, whose older brother was into like the Gainesville scene. So I remember, and this is so funny, I remember him showing me developed photographs like you would get from like the drugstore, from like a disposable camera, developed photographs of him seeing Hot Water Music on a porch, like on somebody's back porch, So his older brother was into the Gainesville scene. So right off the bat, I simultaneously kind of like had access to what we might call the real stuff, in air quotes, the real stuff. And also had a deep sense that I was like the pop punk dork. Cause it was like, I almost didn't have a lot of runway where I had time to believe that like Rancid was the be all end all. Yeah. It was like, I got into it and pretty much immediately I had somebody being like, that shit is lame. You need to listen to Fugazi or whatever. Right. Yeah. Which was both a blessing and a curse. Cause obviously, getting poser checked when you're like 12 is a hard thing. But it did kind of wake me up to like, okay, this is not, NoFX is not the end here, or, not the be all end all. Yeah. Yeah.
My gateway was ska. And so it's like ska into like punk. And then you're like, oh, hardcore, metal, like, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it started out really lame, but where you end up is
right. Yeah. And then you kind of, I don't know if you did this, but then you kind of do the circle back around to realizing ska is incredibly cool if you listen to like the first and second wave, and it's only the third wave that was a little dorky, but still has some merit. Right. Because it sounded better. Yeah. I mean, it was easier to get into as a white suburban kid, but then, I was similar because I liked Rancid and Operation Ivy, and it was the 90s, right? So we were just, ska was the thing, no doubt, or Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. Yeah. You definitely, and then you figure out that the Boss Tones had hardcore cred, and that like, so you walk that path from this is cool to somebody told me this is dorky to actually this is super cool. Yeah. And I can remember going to Best Buy, and this is when Best Buy was still like the best place to get CDs in my town anyway. And I was looking for ska, and I was really into Millencolin. I'm still, if you ask me who my favorite band is, my stock answer is still Rage Against the Machine and Millencolin. I was into Millencolin, and Millencolin had covered a Desmond Decker song. And so I found a Desmond Decker CD at Best Buy and bought it. And so pretty early on, I was availed of the concept that like Real Big Fish was actually ska. And I got into like first wave ska, which was a blessing. And that's some of my favorite stuff, man.
Yeah. Yeah. At what point along the way did you start playing in bands or wanting to be in bands?
So, I mean, pretty immediately I was like, this is what I need to do. I was a church kid, so it was always an option to like play bass in the worship band or whatever. And I was kind of a pudgy kid, up to a point. So sports, and it's like you're looking at the buffet of extracurriculars for a suburban kid. Sports was never going to be it for me. I was from a beach town, so there was always like surfing and stuff like that, but that never appealed to me, probably because I was sort of a nervous kid. And so I played piano, just because it wasn't soccer, like not really out of any musical thing, but it was just like, this is easier than soccer. So when I started listening to punk and realized that I could A, get a bass guitar, and B, sit down and learn bass guitar, like just by listening to songs that I already like. And then C, realizing that somebody needed a bass guitarist. Right. I got into it. pretty quickly. So I would say like 8th grade. I think I was in a really terrible punk band that played our 8th grade it wasn't even Battle of the Bands. It was a talent show. So it was like a girl doing baton throwing, somebody doing like a comedy skit, and like us playing a song we wrote. So it was like 8th grade that I like played in front of people in a band with an original song that was punk for the first time.
Nice. You said you just left Florida. Someone got you a bus ticket. You just left Florida. What was the reason? Just like I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Pretty much, yeah. Like, I'm 38 now. I was 19 when I left. I was just about 20, so it was the summer I turned 20. And I dropped out of high school and was in a band, was in like kind of a screamo sort of band. And then I was in kind of a punk band after that. And, the plan was always, the kids in the Daytona Beach scene took hardcore very seriously. Very seriously. So like, dropping out of high school, doing the band, shows were the only thing that mattered. You do whatever you had to do to make money or survive, but it was only about hardcore.
Yeah.
And so I was doing that. I was kind of like some combination of living in houses I wasn't paying rent in, and we had like a punk house that was quickly falling apart and just becoming a place that the police were extremely aware of. I just kind of hit a wall where I was like, I know this seems silly to only be 19 and already think this, but I just kind of hit a wall where I was like, do I really want to like be dead by 30? Like, do I really not have a plan to like live my life,
Yeah.
But it was just a very nihilistic, for good or ill, nihilistic sort of attitude with me and my friends in Florida. So my band went on tour. The band I was in at the time went on tour with a band from Richmond. And one of the guys in the band was like, hey, he was just complaining about his roommate moving out and leaving for California and him not having a roommate. So I was kind of like, well, fuck it. I'll move in with you. Almost sort of jokingly. And he was like, okay, cool. When can you be here? And then I was gone. Some of it had to do with like a bad relationship I was in. Some of it was like a mixture, whatever the reasons are, you sort of run away from your hometown. Yeah. But ultimately it was just kind of like, I need to figure something else out. This isn't, I can't just do what I'm doing. Yeah. And so I just needed like a reset. So just kind of moved to Richmond on a whim.
Let's talk about Contact. How'd the band get started?
We started in 2019. Probably the real story is going back to 2018, I think. I had not been in a band for a while. I have 2 kids. After our daughter was born, I was in a band called Positive No, which was like a sort of more of an indie rock, kind of post-hardcore band that I played bass in. Mm-hmm. And after my daughter was born, I quit that band because I had 2 kids and full-time job and all that. And I was just kind of like, I'm probably done. It's fine. It was cool. I'll still go to shows, I still love the culture and feel a part of that. But I'm like, I was just kind of like, I'm probably done doing bands. It's fine. Yeah. I'll do what all aging punks do and just like write weird country music in my, in my room by myself. And so that was pretty much to me a done deal. And then in 2018, I went to a Count Me Out reunion. I don't know if you're familiar with that band, but in Richmond, they're definitely one of those hardcore bands that sort of definitive to at least the current generation of the hardcore scene. And I'd never gotten to see them. I really liked them. But by the time I had moved to Richmond, they had broken up. They did a reunion and I went, and those guys are all not too much older than me, but probably 45 years older than I am. So they were already pushing 40 or in their 40s by this time. And I was just like, it was so good that I was like, maybe I'm not done. Like maybe I'm jumping the gun on this being done thing. So I literally went home that night and wrote 2 songs and recorded them on my laptop and then just kind of sat on them. And then in 2019, I just thought, you know what? Let me just see if I can get a couple of guys together and maybe just play these songs and just see where it goes. And it kind of blossomed from there. Then they started writing stuff and I stopped. I just focused on lyrics and after a couple of practices, it kind of was like, yeah, let's do this. So we played a couple of shows before COVID hit, and our first show, the bassist in our band, Camden, he ran a house show venue. The house that he lived in was a house show space. Yeah. And so when we played our first show, it was kind of like playing on home field a little bit. Like our first show, I would say we were cursed by a really good first show. Like you never want to have a good first show. Your first show is supposed to be when like the head blows up and like your strings all break and nobody cares. Our first show was bonkers. Just because there was some sort of like, I think social, oh cool, Camden's in a band. Like Drew, our guitarist, was in a band that kids really liked. I would say I had probably been forgotten about. Any like good energy I had garnered had probably dissipated by that point. So it definitely wasn't me. And then our drummer, it's really the first serious band he's ever been in. So it was Drew and Camden's new band, and so it was a really great first show. And so after that first show, it was kind of like, there's no way we're not going to keep doing this. That wasn't, so fun. And so, that was the start of it. COVID hit. We tried to practice and write a little bit through that. And then when people started gathering again, we got right back into the swing of it.
Nice. Where'd the name of the band come from?
I don't know. The other guys might be embarrassed by this, but I'll be honest. It's at first I wanted it to be No Contact, which is at the beginning of the second Shai Hulud track on their first full length. Yeah. Hearts Once Nourished. And then we sort of shortened it to Contact. And we really liked it because it has a lot of different meanings, sort of, I think on one level, it's like making contact, like just trying to connect, especially after like the pandemic and everything. Yeah. It seems to have taken on a new meaning, like trying to connect with one another again, making contact. I like that it has kind of like a first contact vibe, like making contact with something maybe you don't understand or that seems beyond you. And I also like that it's the word that soldiers, I think, yell when they like encounter the enemy. Like they say contact, left or whatever. So it just had good energy and you kind of kept it. Nice.
How did you guys get connected with Patient Zero?
Oh man, it was weird. It was like a cold submission. We did the EP with our friend Bob, and it just turned out great. I mean, I think it's one of those things you kind of you grade yourself on a curve, like nobody wants to read their own stuff. But when we were done with it, we were like, man, we really like our own record. Like, this is good. We believe in this. And so initially we were just going to put it on Bandcamp or whatever, but then we decided to start sending it out to labels. And so I just emailed every label contact that I could find. We had played with a band called Strike Face, that's on Patient Zero. And we were like, oh yeah, those guys are on a label, email their label. And so it was just a bunch of cold submissions, and Jerry from Patient Zero got back to us and was just like, yeah, I like it. Let's do it.
Nice.
So that was cool.
That's right. Because you're my age, that like explains where this sound comes from. But what drew you to that? Like when I hit play on the EP, I'm like, oh, it's like 1996 again.
Totally.
And it's like, these is the sound of hardcore that got me into hardcore at first. So like what drew you guys to be like, we want to sound like that classic 90s hardcore?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I'm the oldest in the band. We go from 30 to 38. I'm the oldest. So for me, it was just natural. Like you said, like, this is my hardcore. Like I appreciate 80s hardcore a lot. I love bands from that era. I really like a lot of what's going on now. Mm-hmm. But it seemed disingenuous to write stuff that wasn't what it was, what I came up in. And so since I wrote the first couple of songs, that just kind of set the tone. And we're kind of in this nice in-between space where you and I are kind of on the young side. Like if we were going to a show in 1998, we were young.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I sure was.
Yeah. Right. Like maybe like, what am I doing in this abandoned church meeting hall or like this Moose Lodge or whatever? So we're a little bit on the young side. And so with the way that the generation gap sort of works, the other guys in the band, liked that stuff retroactively, or almost were into we're coming up in hardcore when it was almost having a resurgence in a weird way. Like it had already gone away and then come back. And so, stuff like, Strife, Shai Hulud, a lot of the like 90s Victory stuff, Indecision Records stuff, to them is a little more retro than it is to me. It feels a little more present to me, but our interests in it sort of linked up perfectly, and it just made sense to write that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because your influence as like a musical influence is Rage Against the Machine and like that classic hardcore. Does that drive the lyrical content to be outspoken against racism or social justice issues or anything like that?
Yeah, I have never had any interest in hardcore or really music in general that doesn't have a purpose. I can understand it. There's definitely some stuff that I like that's just like self-reflective and very much about, your interior feelings and stuff, which I think are great. But for me, it was always like, if there's no purpose, well, what's the point? It's not art for art's sake,
right.
For me, it always needed to have a purpose. And so, like kind of my weird melding of, again, I grew up a church kid and definitely had that thing of like, I don't really fit in a youth group, but then I also like, my friends in the scene are very atheist agnostic. And so I don't totally fit in there. And so the weird melding of like, the socially conscious stuff, Propaganda, Rage Against the Machine, these are the people that really informed how I see the world working. And then definitely, my faith and stuff like Shai Hulud, even like sort of existential stuff like Shai Hulud's lyrics or Strong Arm or, stuff like that. 108, like Krishna stuff. Just kind of that melding of existential questions and things that are sort of beyond our comprehension. Yeah. And then the very more rational, I guess you could say academic, but political understanding of like the physical world and how it's broken and why. Stuff like capitalism, racism, Christian nationalism, nationalism of any kind, is very much, those are the main ingredients of our whole thing. Yeah.
My first hardcore show was Agnostic Front and No Innocent Victim. So it's like the two worlds coming together and you're just like, okay, this is hardcore. Like people up here. And then some of the NIV stuff now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, that's super cringy. But
that snare sound though, man, they had that snare, especially on that Victory release.
Oh yeah.
They had it. It's a beautiful, regardless of how you feel about the rest of it, the drums on that record are just like almost a gold standard for me of like how drums should sound on a hardcore record.
Give yourself to silence. Cease to free. The mask you choose to wear. We are more than a prison of the flesh. Or sleep to the spirit born before the dawn of time. In the stillness of creation, I sacrifice my thoughts to the reality of truth before lies. Find rest in the flame of the candle.
Well, the record came out in September. Before and Through and Beyond All Time. Where did the title for that record come from?
Let's see. So that really stemmed from my studies of sort of the contemplative path of faith. So this idea of sort of like non-dual thinking, contemplative practice, meditation, definitely a little bit of Buddhist influence, but really informed by stuff like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Thomas Keating or Thomas Merton, these sort of very monastic, like Saint Teresa of Lisieux. This sort of almost, to me, an alternative history of the church and of Christianity. You know, we have the nationalism, we have the crusades, we have like all of the bullshit, but like underneath that, there's always been this like sort of steady, you know, still small voice, right? Like steady, quiet movement of nonviolence, of trying to achieve, I don't know, maybe transcendence is a loaded word, but like elevation of consciousness, right? Like trying to get beyond just what our, you know, sort of empiricism or like Enlightenment era, the entrapment of like Enlightenment era thinking. So it very much comes from this idea that whatever it is we're searching for, call it God, call it the universe, call it reality, that it certainly transcends time. That it is before and but also is within time. So it's like this weird, I don't want to sound too weird. Sound too like I'm trying to be you know, whatever. But this idea that it does not just exist outside of time, but it also within time, the sort of incarnational reality of the divine here and now and later and before. Yeah, that's why we use the wheel of Ezekiel in a lot of our stuff, which is like the eyeballs on the wheel, the sort of biblically accurate angel. You know, is this idea of like when you get into metaphysics and like eternity, that time is just a construct, and that it's important, but it's just like the fourth dimension of a much larger sort of like reality. Yeah. It sounds like I'm straight edge. It sounds like I do drugs. It sounds like I took some mushrooms and I was like thinking about. I should clarify that I'm not on psychedelics.
Once you start talking about like biblical angels, people are like, "Are you high?"
Oh, you're high, huh? No, I'm not, but I get it. Right.
What's the future look like for Contact? I mean, this year is with the holidays, things. Time of year, things start to slow down a little bit. What's the future look like?
That's a good question. We're trying to take things one thing at a time. We all, most of us have kids, and my kids are a little older. They're 9 and 12, so still little. Drew and Jordan have really little kids. Jordan, we always tease Jordan like we don't know how many kids he has anymore. He has a lot of kids. Oh, man. And Camden just got married, and so we're all sort of definitely in a phase of life where the band is not going to be the number one priority. We just got back from I'm going to say tour in air quotes, a weekend trip, which felt like a tour to my old ass. And it went really well. Like both shows were super good. So that was very compelling. Like that interjected a lot of energy. I would say plans for the future. We're going to keep writing. I think we're probably going to do the thing I feel like is common with digital release now, is just like keep doing EPs and you know, we're not really gunning to like put a full length out, I don't think. So we're going to try to we've got 2.5 songs done. We'll probably try to get like, 6 or 7 songs done and do something else. Either digitally or maybe put out a record, although record pressing right now is stressful. Yeah. You put it more succinctly. It's a nightmare. So maybe a tape, but definitely something probably by maybe next winter, summer or fall. We'll have something else out.
Nice. You mentioned you used to have a music comic book podcast. What things have you been into this year? Have been bringing you joy?
Yeah, that's good. I finally went ahead and after the Dune movie came out, so for years, because I'm a geek, so for years people, you got to read Dune. And I've always tried and been like, I don't know, this is weird. I just, it's too much. After that Dune movie came out, I finally dove in. And I'm 3 books in, and I think I might be done because I know that's like the end of his original, he wrote. Then his son takes over. But I have been enjoying it. It does feel like a little bit it's very earned. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of like David Lynch movies or something. Like you earn enjoying it because it feels like a little bit of a slog. So definitely that. It has been good, like being in a hardcore band and releasing music has made keeping up with hardcore feel like a full-time job, but I've really enjoyed it. Like I've really enjoyed like looking at the blogs again and like listening to the podcast and trying to figure out what the hot, the hot new thing is, or what people are into and who's coming up. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. I've really fallen off on comic books in a sad way. I wish that I could keep up, but I can't. And then
pandemic hit, I was like full back in on comics. I was like, oh well, I got time. So
you still reading?
Oh yeah.
Oh, what are you into?
So much. Marvel just had their big Axe summer crossover, Avengers, X-Men, Eternals. That was pretty good. The current She-Hulk run's really good.
Okay. Did you like the She-Hulk show?
I did. It was not my favorite of the Marvel TV, but like middle ground. Like it was enjoyable. And which is kind of disappointing because that's a comic book character I really like, but I think there's potential there. So
I think it's so funny how Disney, Marvel, whatever the conglomerate can literally just like laugh off things that other companies. They were like, "Oh, Deadpool, you did good with Deadpool, cool. We'll give you a Deadpool."
Yeah,
then we'll kind of do it better than you did Deadpool.
Right.
I love that. So pandemic was when you got back into it. I'm trying to think if I know they restarted Saga. Did you ever read that? It's an Image book.
I read that earlier this year. I read it once it came back at the end of last year. I was like, okay, I'm going to dive in. And I read all of Saga.
Oh man, that's great.
Like when Invincible hit Amazon Prime, I was like, all right, I'm going to read all of Invincible. And then I watched the show. Yeah. Yeah.
That one's really good too. I say that I'm not reading comics. I'm literally in the middle of, I'm reading Tom Scioli's Jack Kirby biography that's like in comic form. It was on his Instagram, but then they released a collection. It's super good. Jack Kirby is, besides being probably the greatest pop artist of all time, a wildly interesting person. Oh, cool. Yeah, he was like, he would, I don't know if you've ever heard the story, but you know who I'm talking about, right? Jack Kirby. The guy. There's a story about how he would as a kid, he would get on the subway and just get off in random neighborhoods and fight kids just to learn how the other kids fought.
Oh, man.
Like he was a very tough dude.
That's wild.
Yeah, because he was in like a newsboy gang or whatever, like where you fight for territory.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to As the Story Grows. Our intro music was written and composed by Jeremy Hunt. The As the Story Grows theme is by Bob Nana. If you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and give us a rating and review. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can join us at patreon.com/asthestorygrows. Be a part of our community and join the ongoing conversation over on Discord. If you enjoy this episode, share it on social media with your friends. Much appreciated, and thanks for listening.